Africa Climate Resilient Investment Facility, AFRIRES, strengthening capacity of member states and stakeholders to build climate-resilient investments in transport, energy, agriculture, water, and ecosystem sector.
I am Professor Kenneth Strzepek, and I am a professor at the University of Colorado in the United States and a research scientist at the Joint Program on the Science and Policy of Global Change at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a visiting fellow at the Martin School at Oxford University. So the program is about back in 2010 when Copenhagen was the COP at Copenhagen. There was a study done at the World Bank called the Africa Climate Infrastructure Diagnostic. And the woman at the World Bank, Marianne Fay, she found out that there was a gap in infrastructure in Africa at the tune of about 90 billion. They have updated that to about 120 billion now. But what happened was they did not take climate change into account for adaptation or resilience in that number. So there was a project funded by a number of European organizations called ECRI, which was enhancing the climate resilience of Africa's infrastructure, which was the World Bank and UNECA ACPC. And we have here with us today Linus Mofor, who was part of that. And that was a study that was done that I was part of with a large team. And we looked at and saw that Africa's infrastructure is extremely vulnerable to climate change. So one of the activities that we pointed out that we needed a lot more money, but what we needed to do was to have Africans rethink about how they're designing their infrastructure. And we also did not need to have internationals coming and doing it, but we had to have Africans on the ground level working on this. And this meant training analysts and engineers to think resiliently and exposing politicians and academics to the issues of climate change and resilience. So this program, AFRIRES, was started, and it was initially funded. The first phase of this is funded by the Nordic Development Fund, which is Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, and they are funding these two projects I mentioned at the World Bank, the guidance notes, the capacity training here. They're actually at the World Bank funding pilot projects to do resilience. And then UNECA and the African Climate Policy Center is also developing a knowledge portal to give people data for Africa, about Africa and climate change. So that program is in its third year, and we're just finishing this capacity building training, and we have gone for a year training people both online we're here at IDEP, the African Institute for Economic Development, the training arm of UNECA, and people have been working online. Now we're here working in person and doing training on software tools to do analysis for resilient infrastructure design. When people look at climate change, as Africa knows all well, climate is very variable, and the climate in Africa is probably the most variable in the world, both as a continent, as we look at many climate zones from North Africa to South Africa and from Dar es Salaam to Dakar, but also it is very vulnerable to climate change. And so when we're dealing with this change, there's always risk. So there's two kinds of risk. We have the risk that there are extreme events in the climate. We have droughts and floods, and we've always had them. But under climate change, because we don't know where the world's going on emissions of greenhouse gases, there's uncertainty to the magnitude of the changes that will happen in climate. And then on top of that, the scientists have been working very hard, but we still have a lot of uncertainty about what will be the nature of climate change for Africa. So some parts of Africa, all the models that are out there are telling us that we're leaning to getting wetter or drier. But in large parts of Africa, particularly in West Africa, there are close to 30 international models, and half of them are saying we could get wetter in the future, half of them say they could get drier. And we don't know which of those are correct because there's a lot of scientific uncertainty. So we face a big risk as Africa develops. Are we developing for a world that will be drier? Do we develop a world that will be wetter? But one of the things we're seeing we're definitely going to see a world with more flooding. So when you're building a road, when you're building a bridge, if you're building a wetlands, how do we do it if we're not sure what the system's going to be? So there are techniques that exist called decision making under uncertainty, and we're trying to bring that into the curriculum. So today we have 55 analysts from throughout Africa who are working on infrastructure. They work in government. Some are faculty members at universities, some are in consulting firms, some are in NGOs, and they're working on structure. So, for example, we have one person, Mustafa. He is designing a dam in Nigeria, and he had never thought that the record of the stream flow that he designed the dam for might not be the same when the dam is completed or when they're using it in 30 years. And if we underestimate the flows, the dam will be destroyed. So how does he know how to build the dam if he doesn't know the future? So what we've been doing here is teaching them techniques about how to take risk into account, because the problem is, and this is, Africa can't afford to overbuild. So one solution is to overbuild. Build it high enough so no matter what comes. But if we build it too high, we could have built a school with that money, or we could have built a road. So we're trying to understand how to make the good decisions in a very difficult situation in Africa. Growing demand on the order of $130 billion a year in infrastructure, unknown what are the risks of that infrastructure now and particularly in the future, and limited money. We can't build that. So one of the concepts that we try to bring is building flexibly, or building in steps. So we do what we have to do now, but build it so we can change it easily, make it flexible. So if we find it gets wetter, we can build it higher. If we find it get drier, we don't build it anymore. And we're teaching economics, we're teaching statistics, we're teaching civil engineering, and so we're bringing that all together here for 6 topics. And those 6 topics are agriculture, energies, water, transport, ecosystems in urban areas or cities, and each people are coming with expertise in each of those. But as I was speaking to someone recently, they understand that none of them live separately. They're all connected. Energy is connected to agriculture. Agriculture is connected to water. Water to energy through hydropower. Cities use all of them. So part of our course, which we're doing right now, that's going on at this moment, is how do you work together to solve these things as integrated systems? So the resilience comes because we bring all the things together, because we could be going in the other direction, making things worse, but we can mitigate some of it by coming together. And then finally, one of the exciting things here is that we have people from 30 countries, and most of Africa is regional in that we live in river basins, and these river basins are transboundary. Niger, Nile, Volta, Senegal, they're all multiple countries. So we can't solve it alone. We have to solve it as cooperation and together. So we're working on this today, trying to get the analyst, and then part of our training is exposing decision makers, politicians, and funders that they have to think things differently. And when we ask for funds to build it, we have to ask for a little bit more because we have to make it resilient. So those are all things we're doing here on the program. Now we're focusing on the technical side for the analysts so that they can provide the information to the decision makers to make wise decisions and informed decisions. There is it on many levels on what I hope they will achieve, and we already have some success on that. One level is that they now just understand that we can't look backwards. The climate of the past is not what the future is going to be. So we have to think about that. But as we look forward, it's now uncertain. So we have to get a view of how do we deal with things that aren't certain anymore. So first of all is getting a perspective of that, and we're seeing that. The second thing is, if you are a teacher already, bringing this concept into your curriculum. So we have some professors that are here which said, now I'm going to add this to my course in civil engineering, in chemical engineering, in agriculture. We're now going to look at that. The other one is someone is actually constructing work now. They have just requested funds from the World Bank now to do a study to make sure that their dam is resilient that they're designing. So that is already, we're seeing the action. People are changing what they're doing because of what they've done here. And then on the other side is if people are in government, that they're talking in both directions, telling the people that are under them, this is what you need to do, and communicating above to their supporters that this is a real issue, that we have to change how we think. A paradigm shift is what we call it, that they look at things differently, and that we do this coordinated across ministries. And one of the things we know in Africa is the big push for GDP. People want to grow. It's a number that we use. It may not be the best one, but we think wealth and growth is a measure of development. So if we want to grow in GDP, we want to be growing macro. We have to see that climate change is going to be devastating to that if we don't take it into account. If we don't build our bridges to protect it from the big floods that are coming, then we are going to be hurt by that. If we don't do that, but eventually almost everything in Africa now is education. That we have to bring this down to the elementary school, to the primary school, to the high school, and to the university. A new concept of thinking, and it has to be something that isn't necessarily Eurocentric. How do we bring this thinking into an Afrocentric view, which has a community view, because so much of this is private sector, finance, investment, which comes with a Northern or Eurocentric North American view. We have to blend that, because a lot of this is how much do we spend now to protect people in the future. So we're giving tools, but we're not giving answers. And the point now is that these people are trained, they can be starting making the changes to think about how we do infrastructure differently in Africa. And it's not the same as what we do in India or China or in Brazil. It has to be for Africa and the regions and the cultures and the values that they have. Why education is important. Everything we do is based on a foundation and a view. And if somebody does it for you, you don't know why. You have to learn how to do it yourself so you can make your own mistakes. You can learn. So education is, some of these tools are very complex. They're statistics, they're mathematics. So the whole area of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, is something that we have to push in Africa. It's underfunded, it's underappreciated. Most of these ideas of resilience require something in the STEM related to science or climate change. So we have to make science and STEM something that's exciting for young people to study, that we have to give support for that. When I know how to do it, I can do a better job myself than I'm just standing there handing the data to someone else. So we want it to be people to understand the principles, because then we have to adapt them. Like a good recipe, you may have something and you move now from West Africa to East Africa, you don't have the same ingredients, but you can make something different that's still tasty, but different and still meeting all the needs. So we have to work on that, and education is the basis because it allows you to be flexible and adapt.
AfriRes facility is a joint initiative of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, Africa Union Commission, the World Bank, and the African Development Bank, with initial funding from the Nordic Development Fund. The training, in conjunction with the African Institute for Economic Development and Planning, EDEP, aims at strengthening the continent's decision-makers' capacity to plan, design, and implement climate-resilient projects. EDEP is the UN Economic Commission for Africa's training arm, based in Dakar, Senegal.